Hi everyone, welcome, welcome. Come on in. Let's just wait a couple of minutes and let everyone else in.
Hi, Julie.
Hi everyone.
Hi, Carol. Hi, Cesarina. Who else do I recognise? May Lamont.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Some very, very familiar names here. This is good. Are those of you in Australia joining into the Australian briefings on CSW? If you're not, contact me afterwards and I'll link you into that process.
It's only yesterday I've been able to link into the CSW thing at all.
The ones that ERA are running.
No.
I don't know anything about them.
I'll send a note out afterwards.
Yep, that'd be good.
Elizabeth,
I
right?
haven't been able to access my account until yesterday.
These are separate. These are national things.
Yep.
But even the
that'd be good.
CSW stuff I hadn't.
All right, we're just letting people in. Bear with me. I'm last minuting on this session. So I'm going to give you and share with you what I can and work out what we need to, what information, further information you need for the rest. All right. All right, for those of you who are joining us, if you'd like to just pop your name and country maybe in the chat, it would be great to see the range of people that are joining us. I will start by acknowledging that I am in Australia and I am on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. So I would like to begin by acknowledging our traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters in which we meet today. As I said, I live and work and play on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to pay my respects and to honour their elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge that sovereignty in Australia, as in many countries, has never been ceded in battle or bargain, and that for Australia, for me, we are on lands that always were and always will be Aboriginal lands. And I think it's really important to acknowledge not only our Aboriginal elders, but also their connection to the land, especially with the theme that we have for CSW this year. I'll start us off because some of us have been waiting for about 5 minutes. Lovely to see you all. Before we start, I have something that I have to share with you, which is a new area. I shall just pop this up and let me see, what can you see? Can you all see the screen with the slides on it? Yep. Great. All right, so this is a briefing on the safe space, really. It's around, we are meeting at the moment virtually, and there's been a lot of challenges that have occurred throughout these, throughout many of our lives, I think, in these spaces. So NGO CSW New York is really committed to ensuring that everyone has a fulfilling experience during the NGO CSW virtual forum. The goal is to make this platform as inclusive and as productive as possible through a shared leadership model. And below are some of the guidelines. I'm going to show you some guidelines for utilizing the virtual platform, as well as principles to follow to assure a safe environment founded in respect and inclusivity. These principles apply to all of the NGO CSW virtual forum spaces and NGO CSW in New York virtual events, including public, private channels and direct messaging. So these safety and guideline principles are to ensure that there is a safe space for all, and especially for those who are often silenced in this space, to be able to participate in a means and in a way that is inclusive through using inclusive language and open dialogue. We have a collective mission of advancing gender equality and recognizing that this is a collective mission and we come from multiple perspectives on that. That we operate with compassion, integrity, and honesty, and we respect one another and listen, avoid assumptions, and enable different opinions. We all come from different aspects, and I think it's one of the richest things from this forum is we have the opportunity and ability to listen and hear from others. If we can please show empathy, respect diversity, language, opinions, expertise, and understand, as I have just said, that we come from a context of multiple oppressions. So we're not all starting from the same racing line. Honor confidentiality, what is said in this space is shared in the means of open and inclusive dialogue, but is obviously not to become an issue of if he said, she said. Be positive, seek unity. This is where we are hoping to amplify marginal voices. We are absolutely anti-racist and anti-homophobic in this space, so zero tolerance will be not accepted for any forms of harassment that is deemed on. If any of you have had any experience of harassment or encounter hostile environment, or you're unhappy with something that is said or done, please do contact and report the experience to virtualsafety@ngocsw.org, and NGO CSW New York will be addressing that situation. NGO CSW Asia Pacific has the right and the responsibility to remove anyone who does not adhere to these principles, and where necessary, refunds are not given to those who are removed from the platform. So this is my due care and attention, and I've now got to get rid of that. I've stopped the share. Just got to get rid of it on my, there we go, because I need the next screen to go in. All right. So welcome. This NGO CSW is unique. It is not only looking at the theme, but NGO CSW is celebrating their 50th anniversary of being in existence. So they came about from the Mexico meetings and have been working and adapting and changing and doing their best to keep us all informed across the last 50 years. So we thank them for that. And we acknowledge that while they were partying away on Saturday night in the Apollo Theatre in New York, we couldn't unfortunately get there. One of the things that was very interesting that some of you may or may not have heard is that the UN opened up to civil society again on Monday, the 14th, which was too late for many of us to change our minds and get there. But it's good that it's starting to open up. So there was a slight opening up of the UN for civil society space at the beginning of this year. That closed down with Omicron and the new form of COVID. And now they have just opened again. So hopefully some of our sisters who are based in New York are able to actually get in and be part and parcel of those negotiations. And let's hope that many of us who have met in those spaces across the years, we will be there again next year. So just to kind of put a bit of context for the Asia Pacific region around the key theme, which is achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in the context of climate change, environment and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. Every year, more than 80 million people are added to the world's population. New records are set in carbon emissions from fossil fuel burning. Global temperature data reveals a strong upward trend. though by most meteorologists, this is thought to be the result of a buildup of greenhouse gases. Meanwhile, an area that I used to work in, the list of endangered species in every major group of plants, sea life and animals grows longer, and an educated estimate suggests that within the lifetime of a child born today, half of the species on Earth will be extinct. So we're looking at really large figures here. In figures released in December 2021, over 57 million are affected by climate disaster across the Asia Pacific. So that was last year. 57 million people were affected by climate disasters. As we gather here today, our students in Tonga are dealing with the aftermath of an underwater volcanic eruption and tsunami. The Hunga Tonga Hunga Hahapi undersea volcano that erupted actually produced a blast which was 600 times more powerful than the bomb dropped in Hiroshima in World War II. So that's the level of devastation that was happening. And we got the aftermath of that. The aftermath could be felt in New Zealand and as far away as Alaska. At the moment, Fiji is suffering from destructive winds and the growing intensity of tropical cyclones. Across the Pacific Island states, rising sea levels coupled with warmer temperatures, stronger El Nino patterns increase the susceptibility to water and food security and the increase of deadly food and waterborne diseases, causing displacement of coastal communities. Urban settlements are rising across the region. The rising sea levels are producing a rising tide, so the need to migrate to higher ground is causing urban settlement, displacement, loss of land, livelihood, and a growing impact of food security. Australia is currently under a state of national emergency as the severe rainfall on drought-stricken land, absolutely crazy what's happening here, has caused some of the worst flooding in Australian history. And across the eastern states of Australia, many have been displaced and washed out. Philippines and Bangladesh are also under the threat of flooding. Bushfires are just starting in this country in Australia, and they rage regularly. In 2020, the bushfires in New Zealand, in New South Wales and Victoria burnt out an estimated 33.8 million hectares and destroyed over 5,900 buildings and killed at least 34 people. Sorry, there's people waiting to be admitted. So when disaster strikes, not everyone's affected in the same way. And we know that women and men are disproportionately affected by disasters. In a recent article, it was stated that women are now 14 times more likely to die in disaster than men. So that's 14 times more likely to die in disaster than men. Women face increased risk of gender-based violence during post-disaster, including domestic violence, sexual violence, forced marriage, and trafficking. And through COVID, we've seen a lot of increases in these levels. Across the board, gender-based violence is increasing. The risk of gender-based violence is further compounded when countries and communities are unprepared to deal with the impacts of climate and disaster. And there's a heightened risk of gender-based violence that impacts and include poor health outcomes, displacement, loss and damage, poverty, a greater burden of unpaid care and domestic work, and barriers to food and water security. So in the aftermath of disaster, all forms of violence increase, services are severely reduced, and the socioeconomic health outcomes for women who are vulnerable to natural hazards, including prolonged psychological stress, chronic fatigue, malnutrition, lack of education, unemployment, poverty, gender-based violence, inadequate access to housing, and barriers to healthcare services. Despite this, there still remains many disaster strategies that lack an intersectional lens to ensure that women who face these multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination are included as meaningful contributors to planning, decision-making on climate change and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. So this includes LGBTQI communities, women with disabilities, rural women, and Indigenous women. Loss and damage occurs in natural disaster, both economic loss, impact on women's labour, to livelihoods, access on finance resources, which affect their ability to manage and recover from disasters, as well as non-economic loss, such as the loss of cultural land and traditional knowledge and practices. So it's not lost to us that in this region, this particular area of CSW is essential to have a gender lens across it, and that we are now discussing at the global level what has been discussed over many years, the issue of the impacts of climate change on natural disaster. So I was sort of thrown in this at the last minute, so I'll give you a little bit of an update as to where we are in the draft and some of the language that's being included, and then I'm open to any questions that I can possibly answer. All right, so the zero draft of the agreed conclusions came out, and I'm going to look up a little bit, so please excuse me if I look a bit strange because my notes are on another part of my screen. The zero draft came out in February, and it contained some pretty good language, basic language around sexual and reproductive health and rights, the involvement of civil society organizations, but was fairly thin document overall on the area of rights. So people, excuse me, people are coming in and I'm admitting them as they're coming in. Water, land rights and access to resources needed strengthening, and the areas of conflict, the expected areas of conflict such as loss and damage were not well reflected, and there were minimal references to the needs for states to meet their climate commitments. Language on restitution and colonial legacies was missing. So some of you may know that there's two things that are happening in CSW at the moment. One is the agreed conclusions, which I'm talking about at the moment, and the other is the methods of work. And I'll touch on what's happening with the methods of work after that, because I have been following that discussion fairly closely. The hope for this from many in civil society is that some of the weaker agreements from the COP26, which happened in November, which is the Conference of Parties on Climate Change, happened in Glasgow. I'm sure you heard about it in the news. There were some things that we got over the wire and some things we didn't. So there's a big push to get some of those areas across the wire. And there's other areas that, you know, we won't possibly get. We can try. So this zero draft, as I said, came out in February. It was fairly weak. There was a need for strengthening. The second draft was released on the 24th of February. So this was the compilation draft. The document was released in two parts, one which was a simplified text, which is fairly normal at this stage, where they drew all of the common themed areas into a table format, into a matrix, and then looked at deletions, inclusions, and there was a lot of bracketed text within that. The compilation draft, so the zero draft is the one that UN Women produces and is sent out to the governments. The compilation draft is the one that has all of the inputs from the governments within that. The compilation draft was, it contained a lot more stronger language than the zero draft, especially around the importance of community civil society organizations. It included listing, which included women's human rights defenders, environmental defenders, and for the first time, journalists. So the media has really been included within this. So language about water, access to resources was still not as strong as we'd have liked, but there were multiple references to the roles of Indigenous women as leaders and decision makers, and the importance of protecting cultural knowledge and practices. The negotiation process was held up for a day by the General Assembly's vote on Ukraine, on the Ukraine resolution, where everything stopped. So there was a bit of a delay. And then the text was read for the first time early last week, it was. And the facilitator, it was sort of late last week, early this week. So it was, I think it was last Thursday, actually. The facilitator's from Germany and seems to be pretty good on facilitating and keeping firm hand on timings, which is really good to see, especially after last year when there was a lot of overflow and lack of structure around it. The first reading was very high level, and they went through the text in sections, asking states to identify their priorities and their red lines. And within that context, I know that from my negotiations with Australia, they have been very clear that some of the areas they will be looking at are human rights, the multiple and intersecting forms of disadvantage. So making sure that those are remaining in Indigenous women and girls and women in rural areas and remote areas. They would very much like to see the lived experience reflected through that. Sex and gender-based violence has been highlighted, especially in the area of disability, and the area of accessibility is coming through very strongly. Sexual and reproductive health rights, including comprehensive sexuality education. Now, it's very unlikely that comprehensive sexuality education will get in, but it's one of the areas that's being discussed. Women's leadership is being strengthened. The role of civil society organizations is key to some of this. One of the big areas that is currently being pushed is water. So this is access to water. This is the issues that we see for many rural women around access to clean water, and the corporate capture of many of the sources of water is also being discussed within the context of this. So this is water for both sanitation and drinking, and menstrual hygiene. Women with disabilities and accessibility, as mentioned, one of the key areas around disaster risk reduction is to make sure that women are involved across the whole breadth of that. So from not only mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies, but also in the recovery and resilience packages that come following disaster. And of course, they're very closely linked with what happens within the women, peace and security agenda. So issues of natural and issues of man-made disaster are very, very similar, the displacement areas. So there's a lot to draw on there, and it's looking at how to often get the language in rather than have an argument about where it comes from. So historically, the Commission on the Status of Women is not like to use language from Security Council resolutions, because it's a specific, they have a different way of working through language. And so areas such as sovereignty become a really contested ground. So they try to just avoid it. But there's obviously a big crossover there, so they will be looking at that. The groupings, the countries are working in different groupings. So there's various, they have their own idea, but they come together with like-minded groups and start to do their advocacy and lobbying. Australia is currently working with Indonesia and Norway on disaster risk reduction language. So that's an interesting pairing. And language about Indigenous women and girls seems to be a big priority for several negotiating blocs this year, which is a very welcome development. However, some countries are still contesting the area of girls and don't want to have girls mentioned. So that's where we're at. The second revision, or the revision 1, was released, and that's the one that they're currently working on now. So they released Rev 1, excuse me, which is the one that's busy being worked on at the moment. And they started negotiating on this on the 17th and 18th, and this will be continuing through this week on the negotiations. And I'm not quite sure what paragraph they're up to, because I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to, let me just see if I've got anything further down. Oh, yesterday, they were up to para 47, I believe. Just checking to see if there's anything else there. No, there's nothing else there. There's a big push from, as I said earlier, the COP process, which is part of the UNFCCC. They have a women and gender constituency, and I know somebody's going to ask me what UNFCCC is. Do any of you know immediately what that is. If not, I shall look it up for you. I know it's the all-inclusive program of the climate change agenda. But there's 5 key issues that are really being pushed, and these are the ones that carried through from COP26, and that is the recognition and redress of loss and damage. So this is centralizing, centering the most marginalized peoples and communities in addressing climate impacts, so particularly women and girls, this issue of loss and damage. The other is to commit to ending the sovereign debt crisis, which is to allow fiscal, so giving money and resources for climate action and gender equality. So the commitment for that. There's a bit of a false solution around, or there's a bit of a false notion around this thing of net zero. And there's an emphasis on net zero and nature-based solutions, which doesn't mean you're cutting your emissions. It means you're basically just shifting the emphasis of work. So there's a real need to look further into those areas, especially in solutions around climate and biodiversity arenas. There's a request to advance a just and equitable energy transition, which is the shift from fossil fuel-based economies to a low carbon and renewable energy system that upholds women's human rights and advances social and environmental justice. And then the last part that is being pushed for is the historical obligations to provide gender just climate finance that's predictable, adequate, transparent, accountable, accessible, and in the forms of grants rather than in loans. So that's at both the country level, that's through the bigger financial system, as well as through the supporting of the sector system. I think that's all on that. Let me just check. There seems to be, oh, here's an email come through. There seems to be some building opposition around language on women human rights defenders, but more particularly to women environmental human rights defenders. So there is plenty of agreed language from various documents that can be used on that, where that's been used in past CSW commitments. So before I go into the methods of work, are there any questions anyone would like to ask me about the run through from the zero draft, or anything that's been said so far? So I take silence to be any questions? Anything in the chat? Let me just check the chat. Nothing in the chat. Why can't I see the chat? All right, I'll count to 10 if no one has any. Has anybody got their hand up? I'm sorry, I can't see if you have your hand up. I see Charlene shaking her head. Ah, what was that? Who was that? Shukla, please speak. I think there's only a few of us on this call, so please feel free to call out, and I'm happy to try and assist.
You said there were 5 issues that came up chiefly from COP26.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So one is recognition and redress of loss and damage, and to commit to ending the sovereign debt process.
Crisis,
and what are the other 3? I think I just lost it,
Oh, dismantle false solutions, particularly the emphasis on net zero.
Okay.
And nature-based solutions. So really looking at what the solutions are rather than just throwing, net. Yeah. One was the next one. I can probably put these in the, let me put these in the chat.
Okay. Thank you.
If that's easier for you, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Has that gone in? I can't actually see the chat.
Yeah, it's posted up.
It's there? Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat for some reason. I'll have to save it afterwards, but.
Okay, it's come here, right?
It's there?
Advance
all right, good.
Equitable energy transition and fulfill historical obligations.
To provide
here,
gender
right?
discount. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Okay, good.
Okay,
Is
thank
there-
you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Any more? Can I please just
Well-
shout out, unmute?
Well, it
and-
says on here on the chat that somebody, Vivian's son, had asked the question, what's the latest attitude towards girls?
The latest within the document, I'll comment on how it is reflected within the document. There is a big push by the progressive states, shall we say, to include girls. So it's Russia. Russia is the one who's pushing back. I'm going to say it. Russia is one of the countries that is really pushing back. It's been doing this for a long time. For those of us involved in the Beijing 25, it was a big pushback at that point, and they're starting to align and push with other countries. So I think what will probably happen is we'll get girls, but the area of adolescent girls, which is another area that is often wanted to be inserted, I doubt we'll get in, but we have to wait and see. So are there any more questions in the chat? Could somebody help me? Because I can't see the chat. Pop out.
We don't have
Oh,
any
there
more
it is. I can
questions
see
in
the
the
chat now.
chat, but Jivika has her hand up.
All right, please come in.
Thank you, Devin, and thank you, Carol. My name is Jivika, and we've been looking at the youth and girls markup specifically as part of the youth constituencies across generation equality and with UN Women and other constituencies globally, including UNFCCC. So we're just, we do see that girls reduced by about 80% from the first draft to the one that came out on the 11th. And we've also seen that some states, including EU, have pushed for it and continue to push for it very strongly. But as you said, Russia has been pushing back. And as of yesterday, and I know some of you in NGO CSW were also there, that there was some conversations with about 20 member states who said they'll go ahead and push it. And again, the EU has also said that they'll push it. We're just hoping more and more Asian states can be persuaded. So at least about 20-30 youth have been speaking across the day, yesterday and today, to different, and girls specifically have also been speaking directly. There is adolescent girls constituencies who've also done their own markups. Yeah, thanks for putting it in the chat. That's the recommendations. We'd be happy to share the markups which are in line with the Women's Rights Caucus, because some of us are also part of that,
Yes.
but they also enhance those to look specifically at youth and young women and girls and youth and all that diversity. So just that much, I'll share it here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jerica. Is there anyone else on this call that is following specific language in the outcomes document that would like to share in this space? Because, yeah, who's that? Somebody else has got their hand up. Oh, Jerica, is that you again?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I think you've covered most of it, but I just think some things that worry us a little more is, as you said, the women's human rights language, and within that, the young people's human rights language is absolutely missing. And also to emphasize on it, given that especially in our region, young people have been targeted a lot for climate change in Asia, especially Asia and the Pacific. So that's one thing that we've been pushing. And the second one is loss and damage, right? There seems to be a lot of pushback on loss and damage that perhaps I missed that bit from you, Carol, because I came in 5 minutes late. So that's really been a pushback that's really, really serious. And, even as of yesterday, we're seeing a lot of opposition to the language around diversity and opposing and multiple intersecting forms of discrimination that we've seen yesterday. That seems to have come again and again and again. And any language on justice, right? Anything to do with justice is being cut off completely, whether social justice, climate justice, economic justice, all of that. So we are completely seeing a pushback even from many member states in our region as of yesterday's observations.
Thank you.
And
for
the
that.
latest draft that they have is the 15th at this point of time, which is the one with number markups that we had also shared with some of the caucuses.
Yeah, that's the one that I last saw, and I pulled out that quickly from it, but I haven't chatted it today because I came running in at the last minute. That area of justice is really interesting because it's all to do with reparations and the loss and damage. So they're going to be very careful around that. Yeah. What's the relationship between sovereignty and gender equality? I didn't catch that. Okay, so sovereignty within the context that the way that I was talking about it, and I'm happy for someone else to pick this up. But sovereignty within the context of Security Council resolutions is national sovereignty, and wherein which basically says that the state has the right to do what they want to do, which is what they do anyway. Within the context of CSW, it's used in a slightly different way. Does anyone else have any language on this? Jevika, you probably do know this on the issue of sovereignty.
I mean, again, there's been the whole thing of appropriate has been brought back again and again. Yesterday, as appropriate to nations, individual interests, or context is the language. Yesterday evening, we heard that was back also in a big.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all our markups, of course, cancel it out completely.
Yeah. Okay, let me just check the chat for any more questions. Is there anything anyone else would like to say, to share, to?
Shirley has her hand up.
Please, Shirley.
Oh, hello, I'm Shirley from New Zealand, and I'm also on the Education Committee for Graduate Women International, and I know they were looking, and they were looking at this document a while ago, and they were commenting that there wasn't enough on education on it, and they were advocating for more on it. So I haven't been involved anymore, but I hear you say they didn't want the the bigger picture. They didn't want education, so I'm just wondering why.
No, it was comprehensive sexuality education that was being pushed back, Shirley, not the issues of all education. It's that specific area of and language around comprehensive sexuality education that was being pushed back on. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear in the beginning. Any more hands? Shirley's. Okay. Right, I'll touch briefly then on the other area of work that's happening. And again, I'm very happy if anyone else is following this to, fill in on the gaps that I have. The working methods. So this year, the Commission is due to produce the CSW working methods, which will design how they work for the next 5 years. Now, from my position and from the most critical issue from most of the point of views of civil society is this pushback that we've had. So we've been trying to push a lot further in this space to include recognition and agreement of the role of civil society plays, and that they should have and continue to have an active role in the CSW process. So there's a lot of support from, again, many member states to have a formal recognition of the role of CSOs built into the CSW working groups. The negotiator, who comes from Lithuania, has been very open in reaching out to various civil society groups, and NGO CSW was one of those groups it came out to, and have had meetings with both national and regional groupings of women and feminist organizations. To look at, different ways just to get more ideas as to how we might be able to approach this. They've done the last review on the 11th. I've heard nothing more on that at this point, but there was a big, there are some states that are saying they absolutely don't want to have civil society in the building. There are others who say they shouldn't be in the rooms. So I would call on all of us here who have linkages with our national delegations, and I know many of them are virtual this year, but to really push for the role of civil society and to, with the climate, it's very interesting because trade unions and private industry are coming in under that banner on this one. So this is a really contested area about who is civil society in this space. So I think there's a push through the working methods to clarify that and to make sure that civil society is included as key and partner to that. and CSW methods of work. All right, Jevika, thank you, Jevika, 18th of March. Let's just see what's in here. So there's an update that Jevika has just sent saying that the methods of work, and I have good news for you. So here we go. I have good news for you. If I look at the text that we are working on, it is not finalized yet, but there are paragraphs that countries were able to agree on. And in the few of them that talk about participation in civil society, there will now be a mentioning of youth explicitly. There will be a new paragraph that calls upon the Commission to ensure participation of relevant stakeholders, and then the stakeholders are named very briefly. And it says that it includes non-government organizations, civil society, and youth. So it doesn't say anything there about feminist organizations. It states there will be a paragraph about delegations to the Commission and will encourage member states to consider including in the Commission, in the delegation to these Commission sessions, technical experts and budgeting experts at decisions, but also say that civil society actors, including youth, should be included. One of the important things, I'm following your highlights here, Jevika. One of the important things is a very concrete change that is suggested in the method of work, and that there should be a new event in the official program of the Commission. And this event would be an interaction between youth and the representatives of the countries and officials. We were supposed to finish the negotiation of methods of work last week, but it's not yet finished. Reaching agreement, see what comes. One of the possible ways to cut negotiation. It looks like there might be a positive. All right, so they're moving forward on that. Jevika has very kindly shared the link for that in the chat. So should you wish to read the full paper, please do look at that. Thank you for that, Jevika. And that's where we are with the programs of work. There is a hand up. Yeah, that's Jevika. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, so just to give context to what this is, at the youth briefing yesterday, Latvia had come in, and thank you to the NGO CSW, and they're the ones facilitating this discussion on methods of work. And they basically, where the methods of work has stopped is, of course, one, we've been civil society, but within that youth also, because at this point, there's absolutely no space, right? Or mentioned. So there was at least that much. And this is literally the verbatim transcript of what he said in the meeting yesterday, so that we're able to push it and others can push it. But it seems to have stopped at a point of even, I mean, contentions around the word civil society and youth specifically. And so they will convene again. They could have let it go, but it seems that some member states have really pushed to say that we're not going to let this go. And we do want, again, the same question of adolescent girls and youth and all of that. So, but we are not very hopeful about this. Given that if there's no civil society, then how can we even have youth, right? So, continuing to push for it, but they did say that the negotiations will continue and have not ended. They were supposed to have ended. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think it's going to be a slower process than we anticipated. So that's where we're at. That is the update that I have. Is there anything that anyone else would like to know, like to do, like to share in this space? And Devon's just put the link to the website. Devon, thank you so much. I know it's 2 o'clock in the morning in the US, so thank you for still being here.
No problem.
All right, this thumb's going up. If there is no, are there any areas that people would like to know more about for the next briefing? I mean, it's going to be more, Helen Swales will be assisting me in the second briefing. No? Okay, well, I would like to then close this session and say thank you very much. I'm open again. If there's anyone has any questions or would like to say something, please do stick your hand up or come in now. Okay, so the next caucus meeting is on Wednesday. And there's a link to that in the chat. And I will have hopefully more information for you by then, and we can work better to share what we know. Javika, thank you so much for your information today. It's always really good when you have someone who's actively working on those sessions. So thank you very much indeed. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Have a lovely weekend. Enjoy the rest of the format. I thank you very much. And thank you again to Devon for coming in so late.